Hey guys, how you doing today? I decided that when my company called, the toy store that I work for, that I like working for, that I respect, the people who work there are wonderful people. When they called me to come back in, when the pandemic struck, we all went into isolation, we all went into quarantine. Now there's this movement, right? The Doug Ford administration called them yahoos for getting out on the streets and then capitulated to every demand they had, which is the movement to reopen the economy in the middle of a pandemic. So when my company called me, I said, okay, I think that my company is taking this seriously and is taking safety measures. And you know what? They are. They absolutely are. I can say pretty convincingly that what I saw in the store that I work with was exceptional safety measures, exceptional high level thought and foresight, and they're listening, and that's all very wonderful. I am no longer going into work again. I have decided to take another leave of absence because on my way to work through the transit system, the TTC, my streetcar, the back end of my streetcar was filled with homeless people that had encamped there. I have nothing against the homeless. They're doing exactly what they need, what they believe they need to do in order to look out for themselves. I can't imagine what the shelters look like right now. And it struck me right then. It hit me. And it makes complete sense. Trudeau and these conservatives are enacting half measures, right? The CERB program, the top-up for essential workers, all of that, these are half measures. These are looking at a problem, acknowledging that something must be done, and instead of going all the way and doing the right thing, you kind of do the right thing in the hopes that this situation, the pandemic, will resolve itself and you will be able to just go back to the way things were, because conservatives and liberals think backwards while the rest of us are looking forwards. And if they're going to enact half measures on that kind of level, things like Doug Ford saying don't go out to cottages and then going out to cottages, things like that, if these are the half measures that these people are working on, then those are the half measures that exist throughout the entire society, right? Half measures are everywhere because these people have shown us explicitly that they're not interested in doing the right thing. They're interested in kind of doing the right thing. And I no longer accept that. I no longer accept sort of the right thing. I accept the right thing, or you can leave. Simple as that. I no longer, on my transit ride to my workplace, I have to contemplate the idea that I am going to get sick. And I'm not going to tolerate the idea that my life can be put on the line because the people I elect are less interested in, or even equally interested in, the profits of corporations than my well-being, right? We look down to the States and we can say really cleanly, these people care about profits before their workers. Simple as that. It's not much better to care about your workers, but care about profits a little bit more. It's not much better. And I find myself in a position where I'm not willing to tolerate that. I'm not willing to tolerate these half measures. I'm not willing to tolerate government officials who understand what the right thing to do is and refuse to do it. Or at least pretend as though they are going to do it. In a kind of way, it's worse, right? In a kind of way, it's worse. At least if they were doing the wrong thing, you could galvanize public support immediately. Immediately. If they were doing the absolute wrong thing, if they weren't even passing the CERB, if they were forcing us back into work, you could galvanize public support against them pretty easily here in Canada, I think. But because they're doing a half measure, because they're not committing to actually doing the right thing, it's a little bit muddier and it's a little bit more difficult. Because there will always be people who are saying, well, it was always supposed to be a temporary measure, this absolutely necessary basic income that many countries are actually embarking on and many countries are actually doing, because they see and they realize that it is actually the way that societies of the future are going to work. It is impossible to believe that a society going into the future is going to function without a basic income. It is at the very bottom, like at the very least, a necessary reform for capitalism. That the game of capitalism needs to have some kind of support system. Even the game of Monopoly gives you $200 if you pass Go, right? Even the game that is supposed to be like the mock of Monopoly, or of capitalism, that's supposed to take the piss out of capitalism and act as a critique of capitalism. Even that system says, oh, hey, you made it around the board, here's $200. I don't feel safe in my communities. I don't feel safe in my society. And a big reason why that's the case is because I know that my elected officials are going halfway. People like Doug Ford are outright not taking it seriously unless there's a camera on him. And then I'm very concerned about the Canadian people. Doug Ford's not concerned about the Canadian people. He's not concerned about Ontarians. He's not concerned at all, right? He stands in front of a camera. He says what he's supposed to say with a little sad face on, and then he goes up to the cottage, right? And you can say the same thing about Justin Trudeau, right? Trudeau did the right thing in that one moment, right? On an impulse, and now is looking for the way out. He's looking for the way out. How do we get this society back in the hands of our corporate owners? How do we do that? And I'm so tired of it. I think if you are voting Liberal, you are tricking yourself. You're as gullible or as deluded as a Conservative is in a slightly different way, right? Like, Conservatives have a delusional ideology and a delusional sort of belief in a system. Liberals are delusional about actual things that the actual government is actually doing. Like, Trudeau buys a pipeline, right? The invasion of First Nation lands is happening under Trudeau's watch, right? These aren't things that he's standing in front of. Like, Trudeau goes to climate change rallies and rally and rah, and then buys a pipeline. And his plan for the transition to green energy is not a plan for a transition to green energy. It's literally just a way to convince us to continue allowing oil to get pumped. But then he says moistly and does this to his hair one time, and everyone's like, swoon, right? Not realizing that you're being suckered. He's playing you. Right? He's an actor. He's a drama teacher, right? He's trained to be an actor, and he does it. He plays his role well. And you're just getting suckered into it. He works for the same people the Conservatives do. They're not very different. And it reflects in the half measures. Because the half measures really are kind of the Liberal MO, right? Liberals understand that the only thing they have to do to attain power and to keep it is to be ever so slightly better than sociopaths, right? Conservatives will come in and they will cut and they will decimate and they will consume and they will eat and they will take away everything and do the absolute worst that they possibly can, while positioning themselves as worthless middlemen in otherwise functioning systems. And all the liberals have to do, and all the liberals ever have done, is exactly the same thing, except every so often they just sort of go, meh, and throw a little tiny crumb, just like a little meh. And the only times that the liberals actually stand up and take a principled stand that alters how the society functions and how the society works is when the left stands up and says, no, if you continue acting this way, you will lose power. That's how we got universal health care. That's how slavery was abolished legislatively in this country. It wasn't that a liberal stood up and said, hey, wait a minute, this is the right thing to do. It's that people like Tommy Douglas stood up in the NDP and said, hey, wait a minute, this is the right thing to do. And the liberals went, if we don't do it, we're going to lose power. And it really is that simple. And can you imagine what would have happened to the liberals if they would have passed a half measure? What would have happened if they had said, it's universal health care, but, you got to pay a little, right? They would have been ousted. I don't see it as very different here with the basic income, right? They're passing a half measure. They're not going all the way. And it's reflecting on my streetcar ride when I see homeless people sleeping in the back of the car, trying to stay away from these shelters that are likely riddled with COVID, right? Instead of being able to get the resources they need to turn around, to purchase housing, to purchase food for themselves, to be able to self-isolate, to have that privilege, to have that ability, to be able to quarantine and isolate, to protect themselves from this. Instead, they got to do it on the back of a streetcar because our politicians are enacting half measures that don't help them. And in the end, the crazy thing, and I will always bring this up and I will never, ever stop talking about it, is that the basic income is cheaper than that, right? Those men are sleeping in the back of that streetcar because we're paying more to keep them there. The basic income is cheaper. It's cheaper to just give them food and shelter. It's cheaper to give them housing. We know this is true. It's just a fact. And yet we choose to keep them homeless. We choose to put them in the situation where they have to choose between going into a shelter that's riddled with a virus that might kill them, or get on a streetcar and take over one of the cars and face the legal repercussions of that, likely. We can do better, and I know that we can do better because we can afford it, because it's cheaper to do. And the only reason these liberals and these conservatives are trying to convince us to accept these half measures is so that they can ensure that when we go back to normal, as they're going to try to convince us, because that's how they always think. They're always backwards, right? They're never forwards. They're always backwards. That we're just going to accept the same labor conditions that we were accepting before. We just shouldn't. We just shouldn't. Right? This crisis has really revealed who is here to build a civil society and who is here to extract, right? And I think we can do better. Support a basic income. Good luck out there, guys.